Hello and welcome to another episode of My Tech Dives. In today's session, we'll take a look at when to use microservices in our architecture. These days, we see an increasing trend in the usage of microservices across software development. But why should we use microservices and when to use microservices? What are the limitations of microservices? Let's take a look in this particular session. First of all, microservices is more to do with your business layering than the technical layering. For example, if your business consists of multiple organizational units which can function independently, then microservices seems to be a good fit for your organization, because with microservices, you can write independent software services that can operate independently and communicate only when it is essential in a generic manner using the APIs and multiple API formats like JSON, XML, etc. So unless your business organization aligns with the independent operational approach, wherein each division can operate independently and need to collaborate only when there is a necessity to service the end customer, then usage of microservices architecture doesn't make sense. And it has to be a robust and a large organization as well, because you cannot write microservices for smaller use cases. So at least if your organization has 7-8 units and each of that units has multiple operations, and then collectively they have to work together to service the end customer, maybe in a B2B setup or a B2C setup, then microservices is worthwhile to take a look at. Second, you should always understand that microservices is a form of distributed computing. If you are planning to use your software as a single unit, then microservices doesn't seem to be good for you, because microservices is highly distributed. You will have multiple instances, multiple components running across multiple locations. They all have to collaborate, they all have to be cohesive, and they have to gel together as a single unit to the end user. How you engineer your independent layers, each system, how you scale, how you secure, a lot of things have to go behind the architecture of a microservices based system. So unless you have a huge application which can be broken into multiple independent units, and each unit needs to be scaled out horizontally, scaled out or scaled in horizontally as per the demand, then looking at microservices is not a good option. The third one, in order to work in a truly microservices based environment, you will have to have teams which can work in multiple technologies, because each service could be in a different front end, can have a different front end, different middleware, and you can have a different database as well. So it's all abstracted underneath those APIs. And in that case, each team should be able to handle their particular technology stack very well. Unless you have a team that can work independently according to the requirements of their individual service, then it's very difficult to operate as a team for a microservices based architecture. And if you have a necessity to integrate multiple systems, multiple disparate systems which are totally different from each other, then you definitely need a microservices based architecture, because you can have multiple modes of integration, multiple frequencies of integration. There can be a lot of checks and balances. There can be a lot of ways in which you can throw the responses back at the user. Then you can have multiple modes of what you call arranging your data, formatting your data, transforming your data, and so on and so forth. Each could be handled by independent services. So by services, I mean you can even have your business requirements as independent services, and also the cross-cutting concerns can also be considered as independent services. Cross-cutting concerns like validation, logging, auditing, and so on and so forth. And then for microservices to be truly effective, you need to have a very good continuous integration and continuous deployment process in your organization. It should all be automated. You should have a clear-cut release management guideline, because you will be having hundreds of builds every day, hundreds of releases happening in parallel, And then you need to have strategies like blue-green deployment, canary deployment, etc. So that if a deployment fails or if a deployment is not up to your expectation, you should be able to roll back and retract immediately, and the end user should not be impacted by that. And also, it also brings the discipline in code check-in, unit testing, your integration testing, functional testing. Everything has to be integrated in a pipeline, and everything should be automated, because each deployment might be small, but the impact that it can have on the other modules or other services, we need to make sure that there is no negative impact to it. And also, I want to emphasize on the importance of doing API testing. There are tools like Postman. Even you can use your Google Chrome developer toolbar to do API-based testing. So each API should be tested with the end user perspective in mind. How much response time how much time it takes to respond, where is the bottleneck, and there are a lot of things that you need to analyze. So unless you have that kind of mindset, unless you have that kind of team that can think in that manner, building microservices might be tough. And as I said earlier, developers should have very good knowledge about API ecosystem, how to design APIs, how to secure APIs, how to publish APIs, how to maintain multiple versions of the APIs, how to manage and route APIs, how to do API caching, how to do API authentication, API-based authorization. So there are lots and lots of things that happen. Sometimes you might have a JSON-based API communication. Sometimes that could be protobuf. Sometimes that could be a necessity for Apache Thrift. Sometimes it could be even XML-based. So your developers should have the ability to think through how these object transformations work, how serializations work, what kind of performance impact those things can have. So you need an architect who can give the whole blueprint, but developers should align with that particular architecture. So that is very important. And as a last point, I want to briefly touch upon a new trend, which is micro front ends. So in scenarios where your front end, your UI consists of multiple portlets or cards or kind of widgets, and if you want to have separate technology or an independent framework for each of that UI, then it's a good idea to take a look at micro front ends. For example, one widget you can be using, you can use Angular. For another widget, you can use React. For another, you can use Vue.js. So there are multiple ways, because each JavaScript framework has its own disadvantages and advantages, and its own set of use cases. So similarly, micro frontends also help in easier deployment. You don't have to deploy the whole UI layer as a single unit. You can have multiple layers, as how microservices breaks the entire monolith into multiple functional components. Micro frontends break your UI into multiple UI components. So that's a good thing to have if you're having a very complex UI. So ultimately, it's all about serving the end customer, right? So in that case, it doesn't make sense to build a microservices based architecture if your number of users are going to be, just say 1,000 or 2,000, something like that. But if your number of users are going to be 100,000, 50,000, 100,000 or 200,000, and if you want good performance, if you want concurrency, if you want security, and if you want fault tolerance, if you want to geographically distribute, if you want to operate in a multi-cloud platform, if you want to go to a container-based solution, if you want to go serverless, I think microservice is the way to go ahead. And there are multiple patterns like circuit breaker, bulkhead, and there are a lot of ways in which you can architect your microservices-based application. So I don't have time to cover all those things in this session. Maybe I'll take one session for all these microservices-based patterns in the future. But with this, I want to close today's session. If you have any questions, or if you have any suggestions or comment, I request you to leave that in the comment section. And once again, thank you for taking your time. See you in another session. Thank you.